I'm the Reverend Kimberley Debus. I'm a facilitator and curriculum writer for Wellspring, and it is my pleasure to have this conversation with author Barbara Becker. Her book, Heartwood, The Art of Living with the End in Mind, is part of our curriculum. And I am just so excited for Barbara to be here. We're going to have a conversation about what it means to live our lives to the fullest, what it means to be a good ancestor, what it means to leave a legacy and think about the afterlife. So, Barbara, welcome. How do you understand the optimism or the richness of that?
Believe me, I didn't see it at first either. I really wondered. It seems so counterintuitive. Aren't we meant to live into this life? And then I started reading like the Stoic philosophers like Marcus Aurelius. And I really looked into the Buddhist practices around very intentionally imagining your own death, even. In Christianity, we've had practices from the medieval ages where people would carry little reminders, like a little skull and crossbones, about their own death. And I saw that when we did that, we weren't escaping constantly this idea that we will live forever in this culture where we're forever young, and often we don't even get to see people who are ill or people who are aging because we're no longer living in our homes together, and really just took that on, and it works. I mean, it's something to try to really experiment with this idea of living with the end in mind.
That is so interesting. I think I mean, obviously we know that cultures handle death differently and think about death differently. And there's almost a fear of death and a hiding it away in Western culture and certainly in American culture. And so holding that forward feels so counter-cultural, in fact. It just feels really important to pause with this. I think about how many Unitarian Universalist memorial services are really thinking about not the afterlife, what happens next, but holding memory, memorializing. And I remember when my father died, the minister saying, we live on, or he lives on in you, and how we pass that. And so I guess where I'm heading is how do you hold this knowing I'm going to die and knowing I'm still holding the memories. I am the afterlife for my ancestors.
Well, when I was writing Heartwood, I was really looking for a way to tell the story of loss, but also this enduring love at the same time. And I was so lucky to one day be walking through an old growth forest. And I encountered one of those slabs of the cross section of the tree. And when you look really carefully at that, you'll see that the center is darker than the growth rings that grow around it. And that's called the heartwood. And I think what most people don't know is that heartwood is inert and no longer participates in that flow of water and nutrients up and down the tree. But for the growth rings to grow and to thrive, they need that solid support of the heartwood. And it turns out that we people are a lot like the trees. And this is where your father and my father and so many of our loved ones come into this. They stay with us. They are our heartwood, and we grow around them, drawing from their strength. And also, we too get closer and closer to heartwood. And it gives me hope as a future ancestor to that, someday I, like our fathers, will be heartwood. and my children and my grandchildren, or the people who I have encountered through my work and community, become the growth rings. So it's this perfect ecology of the tree.
Sure, sure. So what what do you think about when you think about the fact that you're going to be Heartwood for other people? You're going to be someone's ancestor.
I love that old wisdom of blessed is she who plants the trees under the shade which she will never sit. You know, to have a switch in thinking when we think about being an ancestor. No, not so much what do I get now? What do I have in my lifetime? Or even what do I have in my single, you know, children's lifetime of one generation, but really to think outward. And I think when we start thinking about living with the end in mind and becoming an ancestor, and we really take that in and we join conversations like this, we start thinking 7 generations out, like many of the indigenous traditions tell us, but even beyond. What do we do in our lives to leave a legacy that will endure? And having a chance to talk like this helps us think through what we want to do.
Right.
I think about my father a lot when I think about the ancestors. I learned so much from him. My dad was no stranger to death. And I wrote about the loss of his first wife in a tragic accident at the beginning of the book. And she's somebody who died so young, shortly after their honeymoon. So he had experienced that. And then he became a neurosurgeon. So he saw the precarity of life and through people who had traumatic brain and spine injuries on a daily basis. But he found ways to take care of himself, and he was always thinking outward, expanding outward, and he loved nature. I write in the book a bit about his love of the UU forebears, the transcendentalists, and Henry David Thoreau. And my dad would take a copy of Walden and go out into the woods, and he really had a sense of deep time. He was really interested in the rocks and the trees, and saw that life was small. And this translated in so many ways, even after he was gone. My dad wanted to leave a legacy for the environment and to care for the mountains and the trails where I had grown up. And he participated in a philosophy that he loved called stretch giving, where you do something that makes your life a little uncomfortable. You give more than you actually have so that you can leave an enduring legacy. Stretch
Oh,
giving was just the philosophy of his life.
and for me, that sounds, I mean, at first when we hear giving, we think money, but that feels like so much more than that. And it feels like like emotional resource.
Oh,
Um,
it is. And I'm telling you, I walked the trails that he has been part of upkeeping
mhm,
through trail conservancies this
yeah,
past weekend.
yeah,
And to walk on that land and to feel him right there,
right.
I really think of Thoreau when he said,
Yeah.
heaven is above us, but also under our feet. In the book, I write a little bit about Indra's net, which is found in many Eastern traditions. It's this beautiful net was woven that stretched out to infinity in all directions. And at the cross of every stitching was a multifaceted jewel. So that when you look into a single jewel, you see people throughout time and space. And I love that imagery, because
Yeah.
aren't we really like that? Aren't we little nodes on this beautiful interconnected web?
I think there's something important about understanding that our reach goes beyond what we know, and that our see if I'm right in this, that our reach will go places we could never imagine after we die.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I've been privileged in the course of my human rights work, which has been 25 years now, to work with a man named Dr. Denis Mukwege, who has won the Nobel Peace Prize as a doctor treating women who have been raped and tortured in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And he challenges us to think about why these horrible acts are happening on his land. And it turns out it's because there's mining happening in the area, mining for all of the minerals we need for our phones and computers, these very things that allow us to connect, but they come as minerals out of the ground in the Congo. So we can't afford to only be thinking about ourselves. I mean,
Right.
we don't want to be complicit in environmental and human travesties around the world. So even the concept of justice is connected to the concept of being an ancestor and
Right.
to living our lives really deeply now.
But what do we do with our own troubling stories? Some of us have done things we're not proud of, or have acted in ways we're not proud of. And yet, if we're beginning to think, I'm going to be an ancestor and I want my effect to be positive, how do we parse and hold the underside of the
Yes,
Heartwood?
but
The
when it comes to our own, and we all have them, our fallibilities, the things that we have done that we wished we had never done. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, every single person has them. And this is a radical opportunity for asking for forgiveness. I mean, we have the chance to do that now. If it's too uncomfortable to do it face to face, I've worked with hospice patients and helped them write letters to people. They've, even if that person who they had wronged was deceased, they would write a story perhaps to their grandchildren explaining what they had done and saying what they had learned. So how do we take our stories and realize that we're so much more than the worst things that we've ever done? I think through this work, we really learn to become good listeners and to ask good questions. And the best questions I've learned are those open ended questions that invite this kind of story sharing where we can tell our shadows. No, we can delve with a flashlight under the rocks and see what we left there, because there's a concept people are talking about right now in the field of social psychology, and it's called psychological richness. And it really invites us to be curious and open-minded, to go into the challenges of life and what's hard, as well as our joys, and to see that our wholeness lies in there. And this is a world of 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows, as the Taoists tell us. And how do we embrace that? Embrace all of it.
How does someone figure out what that is? How have you understood that journey toward actually letting, as Parker Palmer says, letting our lives speak?
Through the course of writing this book and living through so many losses in my own life, started really trusting my own true north. I really listened deeply to what my heart was saying, and trying to figure out if there were places in my life where I was just doing what was expected of me, or just on that treadmill of life, which we can so easily fall on, especially in the busyness and the demands of everything we have going on in modern lives. But
What are some ways that we can still do this work to still sort of experience and listen to the deep heart and listen to the sounds and the calls of our ancestors without going on pilgrimage, spending a year in Walden, etc.
So our life is full of beginnings and endings. It's not just the extremes of birth and death. And we've probably had many already today when we leave the house to go to work, or a loved one leaves and we say goodbye. How do we pay attention very exquisitely to those goodbyes? Because they're all a training ground for this larger place of life. Um, I've spent a lot of time on Native American reservations around the Black Hills. I'm part of a delegation of Zen peacemakers and Lakota elders. And I've learned from one of the Lakota elders some incredibly beautiful lessons. I mean, she tells me that she wakes up every day and says to herself out loud, "Today is a new day." And it's really gorgeous. I've taken it on as a practice myself. Today is a new day, because in that is the opportunity to set intentions to live our own lives richly. You don't have to go to all of the corners of the world to, have the finances and time off to do that. Really, we can do it by putting our own 2 feet on the floor and saying these words as we wake up. Today is a new day.